If you've been teaching the IELTS for any amount of time, you know it's a bit of an endurance race for our students. It is tough, but one of the toughest things for most people is the speaking test. This is because you're in a room with an examiner on your own and it is nerve-wracking. So as teachers, it's our job to help our students as much as we can. So today we're going to talk about how you can give a mock speaking IELTS exam, which will really help your students get over their nerves, as well as giving them feedback that they can work on to improve and get the band score that they want. So let's jump into it. So the question is, how many different parts are there of the IELTS exam? Now, technically, there are 4. There are 3 within the exam itself, but there's also something that we call Part 0, which is basically the introduction and the administrative part of the exam. This is when the student first comes into the room, presents their ID and that sort of thing. So a good rule of thumb is to practice everything so that the student is really prepared on the exam day. So a good tip for Part 0 is to tell your students to come into the room and to follow the instructions of you as the examiner. So they should sit down when they're asked to. They shouldn't show their ID until they're asked, because apparently that really annoys examiners, I've been told. And also try and dispel any kind of myths that they have. Things like eye contact being important. It doesn't affect the score. It's just a politeness, but lots of people think it really does matter. As well as calling the examiner sir or madam. I was doing a mock speaking test the other day and every second word out of the guy's mouth was sir, and it kind of got a bit annoying. So just teach them the right way to address the examiner, all that kind of thing. But talking about the actual exam, so Part 1 is going to be kind of like an interview type thing. Make sure you have a stopwatch. It should last no more than 5 minutes, and it's up to you as the examiner to keep the pace going. Now, in our practice tests, we kind of like to let the students talk a little bit, but don't be afraid to cut them off, to move on to another topic, because you don't want to spend too much time on the first set of questions, which is always going to be either do you work or study, or about the neighborhood or the hometown. So try and push the student along into the more unfamiliar topics which follow the first set of questions, which we always kind of know what it's going to be. So let's talk about Part 2. So what happens in the exam is the student is given the prompt and the examiner says something like, I would like you to talk about someone who's influenced you. You're going to have to talk about this for 1 to 2 minutes, and before you start speaking, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you'd like to say. During this time, you can make notes if you wish. Do you understand? When the student says, yes, I understand, the examiner will give them a pencil or a pen and a bit of paper. And they're able to take their notes, and they're able to keep onto their notes right through the 1 to 2 minutes that they're speaking. It's up to you as the examiner to stop the student when you feel they've given you enough information or they're not going to say anything more. As a general rule of thumb, I like to give my students the full 2 minutes, because it kind of teaches them what it's like to talk for 2 minutes. After the 2 minutes, you have to interrupt them. So I normally say, thank you, or you can stop speaking. After this, what the examiner normally does is to ask a question related to what has been said. Now, this is the only question in the IELTS that your students can say yes or no to, and you can tell them that before the exam starts. Basically, the examiner just wants to move the student into Part 3. So Part 3 lasts about 5 minutes as well. And again, it's your job as the examiner to keep the pace going. Now, the difference between Part 1 and Part 3, and something that you should really be doing in this mock speaking test, is to ask follow-up questions. So when the student says something, you can focus on the point they've made and ask a more in-depth question. And the reason why examiners do this is to really test the limits of the students, exactly how well they can understand questions and how well they can express themselves. This particularly happens with higher level students when the examiner decides they're really going to test if they are an 8 or a 9. So get in the habit of, when you're giving your mock speaking test, to use follow-up questions, because the students should expect that. So that's basically the structure of the test. And what you want to do is try and keep to it as much as you can. But obviously most of us, we're just teachers, we're not examiners, so we don't exactly know what's happening behind the veil of the IDP or British Council. But what you can do is you can talk to your students who perhaps have taken speaking tests, and from that you kind of get an idea of what it's like. If you also want to hear what a mock speaking exam is like, you can check out my other IELTS channel, the IELTS Grind, where we do weekly mock speaking tests live for students, and you can listen to that and see exactly how I do it. But the question now is, how can you make this even more useful to your students and give them feedback? So I'm not going to lie to you, it's kind of tricky to conduct a speaking test, to give a band score, and also to give corrections. So wherever possible, I would really recommend that you guys record what you're doing. So if you get your phones out, you can just record the speech. And this will give you an opportunity to perhaps later on listen back and give some really detailed feedback. It also helps you to play to the student what they said, and then they can hear their own mistakes. What I kind of like to do is, before I give a mock speaking test, I have a bit of paper and I kind of split it into the 4 marking criteria. So you've got your fluency and coherence, you've got your lexical resource, you've got your grammatical range and accuracy, and you've got pronunciation. And within the different 4 sections, you can kind of list down the things that you're listening for. So for example, if we're listening for pronunciation, we might have a little box which has intonation, word stress, sentence stress, all these kind of things. And you can tick when you hear something that's good, or you can make notes about things which can be improved. For grammar, for example, you can list out lots of different grammatical structures and things like that, and just tick them off as you hear them. Now, this isn't exactly how the examiner does it, but as English teachers, that's really how we can approach it. The other thing I like to do is have a separate bit of paper, which is blank, and to write down sentences if I can, write down words. This will really help you give detailed feedback to the student and really laser focus on their particular mistakes. Now, as I said, it's not easy to do this all at once, but the more you practice, the better it gets. And an added bonus of you writing things down is that the student gets used to that, because the examiner will be writing things down as well in the real exam. So there are just some tips of how I conduct mock IELTS speaking exams, and hopefully you're going to find that useful. And if you did, don't forget to give me a like, because it helps spread these videos to other teachers just like you. And if you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe. Now, if you've been watching this video for research and you're not actually teaching yet, then why not check out the link where I talk about how to become a teacher and the training that I recommend, both online training courses and in-person training courses. And you can find that link in the description. So thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.